Nostalgia is a drug. Delusion-inducing and dangerous, it can poison the mind if you're not careful. Every generation likes to think that the time of their childhood was the best time to be young, and that things have decayed since then. Like any drug, nostalgia can be abused as a coping mechanism. The same stories and feelings that provided us comfort or temporary relief in times of hardship can handcuff you if you're not careful. You can become dependent on that. We chase the familiarity of that high because it's a form of escapism. And like a hypocrite, it's the chase of that high that brought me all the way out here to Japan. I suppose the older I get, the more I'm unsure whether growing old and growing up are the same thing or not.
We're here in the ancient city of Kyoto, one time the political and cultural capital of Japan. It's a truly magical city. I'm lucky enough to be staying in a 100-year-old kiyomachiya in downtown Kyoto. These are the traditionally wood-built townhouses in the heart of the city. There are very few places on earth that act with such intentionality to keep the purity of the past alive as they do here in Kyoto. The city is surrounded by mountains and rivers like the one you see behind me. It was founded in the year 794 by Emperor Kanmu, and it remained Japan's political and cultural capital for nearly 1,000 years till the end of the Edo period in 1868. The bilateral relationship between the city of Kyoto and the values of Bushido are deeply intertwined. The samurai class of Kyoto weren't just warriors. They were also deeply entrenched within the political hierarchy of the time. They served important roles as government administrators and cultural stewards.
The samurai were the enforcement arm of the shogunate. They were tasked with upholding the law, maintaining social order and cohesion, and implementing Bushido's core tenets within the framework of the city's governance. It stands to reason that without the samurai, Kyoto wouldn't exist as it does today, or have survived for nearly a millennium.
If you want to better understand the history of feudal Japan, Kyoto, and samurai culture, look no further than the catalog of one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, Akira Kurosawa. To the uninitiated, I have no concept of even knowing where to begin how to contextualize Kurosawa's greatness. It would be like asking someone what makes Michael Jordan good at basketball, or what makes Pablo Picasso a good painter. The stories of Akira Kurosawa are so ubiquitous, so timeless, that you've probably seen them even if you haven't seen them.
Take, for example, one of Akira Kurosawa's most iconic films, Seven Samurai, that was adapted into The Magnificent Seven in Hollywood. It's also the basis for Pixar's A Bug's Life. Then, of course, there's Kurosawa's classic 1958 film, The Hidden Fortress, a film which George Lucas himself credits as one of his biggest inspirations for a little movie called Star Wars. There is a Pokemon episode from the 1990s called Showdown at Dark City, which is a direct homage to the film Yojimbo, a story about two rival gangs and a town caught in the middle. Rashomon, a film so groundbreaking at the time of its release in 1950, was so influential in filmmaking that it went on to birth the term the Rashomon effect to describe the unreliable narrator as a popular and reoccurring trope in storytelling and film. Rashomon is credited with heavily influencing films such as Gone Girl, The Usual Suspects, and Vantage Point, just to name a few.
What sets Kurosawa apart from other great filmmakers goes beyond his technical mastery of filmmaking as a medium. It was his ability to draw parallels between the issues and existential themes that existed in feudal Japan and the contemporary Japan that he lived through personally. A vast majority of Akira Kurosawa's films were made and released in the years and decades immediately following Japan's surrender in World War II.
Japan braved a lot of hardships as it rebuilt itself in the immediate years after the war. Inflation hit 500% a year by 1946, wiping out people's savings and paychecks. 70% of the working class population in Japanese cities were in poverty. The gap between haves and have-nots exploded, and justice was not served equally amongst those groups, as people resorted to their worst impulses to feed themselves and survive. Kurosawa witnessed all of these social injustices of class struggle and inequality firsthand, and it deeply inspired his filmmaking. The samurai was an often cast protagonist in Kurosawa's films. Samurais, of course, were the enforcers and gatekeepers of justice in feudal-era Japan. But justice is imperfect, imprecise, and subjective. The samurai protagonists of Akira Kurosawa's stories did not follow the traditional samurai archetype. They broke rules, often acting on their own interpretations of justice, rather than the social expectations of justice or the legal definitions of justice at the time.
Kurosawa's protagonists were often placed in situations where they had to choose between the morally correct thing to do or the socially correct thing to do. Oftentimes, in breaking from tradition and collectivism and social expectations in favor for their own interpretation of humanity and justice, his protagonists did not have happy endings. Such is the case for Kikuchiyo in Seven Samurai, Watanabe-san in the film Ikiru, and Kichi from the film I Live in Fear. My personal favorite Akira Kurosawa film is Ran, released in 1985. It is one of the few color films that Kurosawa ever released, and it is the penultimate film he released before his passing. Aside from being just a visually stunning masterpiece, every frame, every scene is just so well crafted and technically just on point. Ran is an adaptation of Shakespeare's King Lear. It loosely depicts the events of Japan's Sengoku period, which is a roughly 150-year period of political turmoil and civil war all across Japan.
It is true courage to live only when it is right to live, and to die only when it is right to die. We live in a time and an era where individuals, brands, entire industries are financially incentivized to play it safe, to not rock the boat, to avoid any sort of social disruption, to do everything to protect shareholder value. There is one company, however, who has always zigged when the rest of the world has zagged. A company that has never shied away from taking big risks and making big failures. A company started right here in the city of Kyoto over 100 years ago. A company that I would consider to be amongst the most courageous and bravest companies in the world. I'm talking, of course, of the Nintendo company. Founded in 1889, Nintendo's story goes back far beyond a time of computers and microchips. Their first product was a deck of traditional playing cards known as Hanafuda. A full deck of Hanafuda cards included 48 cards, 4 cards for each 12 months. Each set was themed with floral or seasonal designs. The object of the game was to collect combinations of sets and prevent other players from completing their sets. As time went on and technology developed and Western influences played a larger role in Japan, the popularity of the Hanafuda declined. In response to this, under the leadership of then-President Hiroshi Yamauchi, Nintendo began a decades-long transformation of its business, a multilateral transformation that included heavy investments in research and development. You see, the thing is, Yamauchi understood that Nintendo was not a company that principally sold trading cards. They were not even principally a gaming company. At its essence, Nintendo was and is a company that sells and creates experiences. Nintendo's diversification strategy was so bold that they ventured into areas like creating hotel chains, an instant rice product, and even a taxi service. All of them failed spectacularly. Then in 1966, in collaboration with Japanese toy maker Gunpei Yokoi, Nintendo released its first electronic toy, the Ultra Hand. The Ultra Hand was a huge hit. The success of this product and partnership with Gunpei Yokoi re-established Nintendo's core focus as an entertainment products company. Over the next 2 decades, Nintendo and Gunpei Yokoi collaborated on a variety of successful electronic toys. In the background, Nintendo's decades-long investment strategy into research and development was soon about to pay off in a big, big way. Then, in 1977, two things happened which changed Nintendo's destiny forever. First, in collaboration with Mitsubishi Electric, Nintendo released the Color TV game platform, their first ever home video game console. Second, at some point in 1977, a mutual friend introduced Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi to a man who was hoping to set up an interview between the Nintendo company and his son. Yamauchi himself admits, had it not been for the mutual friend's vote of confidence, he would not have granted the interview. But the interview did take place, and the man's son was hired as an apprentice for the Nintendo company. Nobody knew it at the time, but the man's son was going to play a defining role in both Nintendo's legacy and the video games industry as a whole. That's because the man's son was none other than Shigeru Miyamoto, one of the most influential and iconic video game designers of all time. Miyamoto's work ethic and creativity allowed him to climb the ranks at Nintendo very quickly. In just 4 short years, he was tasked with leading the game development, character design, and story of Donkey Kong. The game involved players controlling an unnamed, mustached protagonist wearing a red hat and overalls, trying to rescue his girlfriend from the clutches of Donkey Kong. Maybe you see where this is headed. 2 years later, in 1983, Nintendo was set to release its flagship home entertainment console, the 8-bit Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. By this point, Nintendo had invested so much in research and development and unsuccessful product diversification that they were on the verge of bankruptcy. The NES had to be a success, or it would be the end of Nintendo's near 100-year existence. Nintendo understood they needed to bundle their new console with a successful video game franchise to carry sales. Faced with a looming existential threat, they turned to Miyamoto again. Instead of starting from square one, Miyamoto refined his existing protagonist from the Donkey Kong game. He reimagined the character as a plumber after colleagues noted his overalls and mustache suited the profession. Since Donkey Kong was based off of King Kong, it made sense to set both games with the same protagonist in the city of New York. And since the game is set in New York, the main character should obviously be Italian-American. And since he's Italian-American, he should have a comically stereotypical Italian-American name, like, say, Mario. And since we're at it, why not give him a twin brother who wears green instead of red, and also give him an aggressively Italian name, like, I don't know, maybe Luigi? And since Mario and Luigi are plumbers from New York, why not have them traverse through levels designed like sewers, filled with creatures emerging from oversized green pipes? And thus, the Mario Bros were born. Of course it makes perfect sense, and of course it sounds ridiculous. Welcome to the world of Nintendo. The game was successful in Japan at the time of its release, but the popularity of Mario Bros exploded once arcade versions of the game were released in America. In 1985, Nintendo sought to capitalize on its newfound success overseas and export the NES home console to the American market. Miyamoto and Nintendo both agreed that for the home console format, Mario Bros. Should be evolved and fine-tuned to offer a distinct experience from its predecessor. For the new and improved Super Mario Bros., Miyamoto drew profound inspiration from his childhood exploration of nature. The game brought Miyamoto's vision of a world of open skies and vibrant colors to life. You see, Shigeru Miyamoto was raised in a rural town outside of Kyoto. As a child, he grew up without a TV. His sense of wonder and imagination came from discovering the forests, fields, and caves that surrounded his town. In an interview decades after Mario's release, Miyamoto famously recounted a story from his youth when he stumbled upon a cave entrance. He spent days mustering up the courage to enter the cave, and when he finally did, he said it mirrored the feeling of being warped into another world or dimension. By bundling Super Mario Bros. With every purchase of an NES, Nintendo sold over 1 million copies of both in the United States in its first year. By the end of the decade, over 9 million units were sold. 40 years after the release of Super Mario Bros., Mario remains the most successful video game franchise of all time, exceeding 950 million units sold across 200 titles and generating a lifetime revenue of $20 billion. The success of Mario Bros. And the NES didn't just save Nintendo from bankruptcy and an industry-wide market crash. It gave Nintendo a blueprint and flagpole for the way it still operates today. In 2015, Shigeru Miyamoto was asked in an interview why he feels his game is so beloved worldwide. In his own words, he responded by saying, "I think that Mario became so popular because the actions in the Mario game are something that are innate to humans everywhere. Everyone is afraid of falling from a great height. And that is what makes Nintendo different. They aren't afraid to fall or fail." Nintendo stands as a rule breaker in the video game industry through its courageous decision-making and creating unique experiences. Whether it's risking the entire company on a game based on Italian plumbers, utilizing a wand-like motion controls to simulate gameplay, or creating a hybrid home and portable video game console, you can always count on Nintendo to swing big. We've been talking about the past a lot during our time in Kyoto, but I think we have to go back even further. Back to the start of it all, the start of Bushido and the start of Japan. So, next stop is off to the island of Kyushu.